Hi everyone. Today we'll be doing one thing and one thing only, which is issuing a follow-up to my essay, White Moderates Still Don't Challenge Fascism, re me, vis-a-vis Salomon Nelson versus Mike Israetel, and both men's racism. This will not be my first video surrounding this specific essay, this time around, going over further updates and bullshit by date, reiterating my coverage of pro-science and their own discussions of racism, as well as people who defend Salomon suck, e.g. Anabolic Stick trying to whitewash Salomon Nelson by calling out Mike's racism for him, Don Mazzetti, aka pro-science, is a broken clock, and Salomon's latest video still doesn't address Mike's racism. Before we get started, if you want to know more about me, you can scroll down to the bottom of this blog post where I have this section here, and you can pause and read it from top to bottom, as well as support me if you like through Ko-fi or Patreon. I also have a Blue Sky account, but be forewarned, it is 18 and up. This essay and blog more broadly, though, are not 18 and up. They have been curated in such a way that anyone should be able to read this. Also, before we get started, the video in question, the one that still doesn't address Mike Israetel's racism, is Salomon Nelson's video, my response to Mike Israetel and Lane Norton. We're not going to watch that just because it doesn't talk about Mike's racism, which is the point of this video. But needless to say, if you look at the timestamps, there is nothing in any of them addressing Mike's racism. There are other people in Salomon's orbit who do talk about Mike's racism. However, Salomon himself in this latest video, after I've called him out multiple times for not talking about Mike's racism, still doesn't talk about it. That's the point of this specific follow-up. All of that being said, let's get started. Further updates and bullshit by date. This story is still unfolding. The updates below are things that have occurred since this essay went live. It gets a bit messy, but try to remember one constant, that pretty much everyone here, including Salomon, is racist and guilty of profiting off said racism. And while I'm certainly not perfect, no one is, I can at least try to cover racism in bodybuilding to expose it, but also in other forms of media on a regular basis, e.g. in video games and heavy metal, but also versus YouTubers I've cited in the past who wound up betraying the cause. 10/23/2025, Bro Science. Added a new section called When Bro Science Beats You to the Punch, the Swoletariat. To that, white moderates don't challenge fascism, and white moderates still don't challenge fascism. Both stress Salomon Nelson's continued inability to critique fascism in his own backyard. re. his September 29th expose on Mike Israetel failing to acknowledge Mike's open race science. re. Scientific snitches, Dr. Mike is wrong about race and biology. August 1st, 2025. To it, I've updated my follow-up essay to include additional evidence, i.e. following Bro Science releasing their own video, Do You Have Good Genes or Are You Racist? re. October 22nd, 2025, above. My latest findings conclude that Salomon knows what race science is, but that he pointedly refuses to call out his career nemesis for it when push comes to shove, their rivalry being the goose that laid the golden egg. Salomon is a broken clock, someone who once critiqued race science openly. re. Scientific racism debunked, but currently refuses to, despite me having called him out for it repeatedly in 2025. In conversational parlance, he sold out. 10/27/2025. People who defend Salomon suck, e.g. Anabolic Stick trying to whitewash Salomon Nelson by calling out Mike's racism for him. The kind of people defending Salomon really suck, above. This image has been censored despite the fact that it's censored already, just because I don't trust YouTube censors. The short version of what's going on here is, I criticize Bad Empanada for critiquing Natalie Wynn using slurs. He responds by saying that we need to bring back forced labor. I respond by saying I'm seeking to raise awareness about his grifter genocidal behaviors punching down at trans people. He responds, why does this post have naked pictures of you attached to it? You need serious psychiatric assistance. Seriously, do not click. These people are deeply unwell and can't help themselves but to permanently sexually harass everyone around them. I respond, TERFs are swerves, and if you scratch a swerve, a fascist bleeds. Like, I'm a sex worker, dude, and the image isn't nude, it's censored. Classically, they'd use a fig leaf, not a Metroid, but my point still stands. That's not harassment, you puritanical weirdo, so quit with the Darvo already. Someone else responds, CJ McIntosh in particular, I'm trying to understand how I have already encountered this weirdo via her pathetic critique of a fitness YouTuber I follow. What the fuck is going on? To which I say, for context, in case anyone's wondering what he means by her pathetic critique of a fitness YouTuber I follow, R.A. Solomon Nelson being historically unable to mention Mike Israetel's blatant race science, who tried to dogpile me, a trans sex worker and anti-fascist academic, when I'm attacked by a weird swerve like Bad Empanada, who you can read all about here, R.A. raising awareness regarding Bad Empanada and his fascist behaviors. Said person, specifically CJ McIntosh, seemed to think that I never responded to Solomon's My Response to Persephone Vanderwaard video from March 2025, asking me that after I'd already sent him screen caps of the 2 essays I wrote outing Solomon as a white moderate. Also, some people are currently trying to frame Solomon as a champion versus Mike, i.e. as campaigning to expose his racism, by talking about everything the man did except his racism. Yet here people with larger channels are treating Solomon like some kind of champion for the cause. As my bro science addendum shows, Solomon has known about Mike's scientific racism since January 2025 at least, but has not chosen to say anything for 9 months. Furthermore, Solomon insisting that he can't cover it because he's facing litigation for the PhD expose makes no sense, because he could have exposed Mike's race science in said video, the alleged source of the litigation proceedings. In fact, he had already critiqued the notion of race science versus a much smaller opponent in 2018, so you'd think he'd want to hold his arch-nemesis accountable during his magnum opus. Instead, Solomon deliberately chose not to, with Scientific Snitch having released her coverage on the topic nearly 2 months before Solomon's video, and me having sent him the info in January, above. To which he responded to my video in March with his My Reply to Persephone Vanderwaard follow-up, impeaching my critique of capital and billionaires while simultaneously ignoring my clear and direct warnings about Mike's race science. As I write in my community post responding to Anabolic Sticks why Mike Israetel needs to be stopped, please bear in mind that Solomon has refused to cover Mike's racism for over a year despite knowing about it. He is not the hero in this situation. He's waiting for others to say the quiet part out loud, effectively hedging his bets, despite said racism being clear as day. There's no good explanation for Solomon's behavior, save that he's an opportunist and a coward, as white moderates historically are. 10/31/2025. Dom Mazzetti, aka Bro Science, is a broken clock. It bears repeating that Bro Science, aka Dom Mazzetti, is also a broken clock, RE being sexist below, but ableist and queerphobic himself. He and Mike are apparently deciding to profit off the situation by not talking about Mike's racism, the two very publicly endorsing and defending each other, a match made in hell, Dom defending Mike, and Mike defending Dom. The irony here is that Dom is racist according to his own argument, and Solomon is still racist for much the same reasons. It's a lose-lose situation, insofar as they're both profiting off the very racism they refuse to meaningfully discuss concerning Mike, such as capital and racism in action, Mike and Dom's open unholy union, merely kayfabe when all's said and done. Same goes for Solomon and Mike, to be frank. Also, anyone who says you have good genetics unironically is racist, including Dom, when talking about himself or others, i.e. eugenics and racism being historically founded on the mythical and false notion of superior versus inferior genes, R.E. Nietzsche's Übermensch, Untermensch dichotomy, upheld by the usual benefactors of capital under neoliberalism, white straight dudes and token people, embodying their own colossal vanity, tied to the West as superior to everyone and everywhere else. It's real Nazi shit, regardless if it occurs overseas or at home, on stage or off. Mixing truth with lies, denying racism exists is racist. Dom's a jokester, pimp, breaking bread with fascists. His incessant patriarchal clowning is merely a whitewash profiting off and alongside bigots. In the end, selling out is selling out, something Dom arguably did long ago. In other words, a student defender of the patriarchy like Dom is little more than a pimp in disguise, carefully advertising the usual manly dogma behind salvos of funny-sounding gun noises. Dated, tired attempts at frat boy comedy aside, the whole premise and attempts at distraction by flexing one's muscles treats bigotry like just a joke. They're all pigs. The accountability between them as mythical as the assorted virtues and vices they sell to others and embody from Plato onwards. Fuck 'em. And their big muscles. Plato, whose famous name means broad-shouldered from his own wrestling days. Quote, Plato was a fighter. This is not a metaphor. The historian Diogenes Laertius tells us that Platon, meaning broad-shouldered, was the philosopher's wrestling nickname. As a prominent aristocrat, Plato was known for his pedigree and youthful poetry, but also for his physique, the muscles of a gifted grappler who reportedly competed at the Isthmian Games. Unquote. Such champions of modernity nowadays, weird canonical nerds emulating Plato in bad faith and bearing their muscles like armor to shield them from criticism, are themselves horribly dated in a variety of ways that keep them in the cave. Originally from Plato, but updated by various thinkers exposing toxic masculinity after Gamergate and Trump, e.g. Mark Green's manbox idea, which I apply to Caleb Hart, and similar content creators across multiple media forms. Consider Volume 3's Inside the Manbox for something more dedicated to bigoted pimp-like streamers. Caleb Hart, and people like him aping Pygmalion by acting strong but in truth being afraid of everything and having to coerce and cover up their own abusive relationships, with Caleb having his mommy and daddy coerce Barbie Edge, a woman of color sex worker, into aborting her child after he got her pregnant. The only time such persons are happy is when they're in control and harming others with said control, so we must take it away from them, through our voice as the antidote to silence, thus rape and genocide. Unquote. In regards to multiple media forms, i.e. to canonical weird nerd culture that got colonized by patriarchal dickwads who treat the world like their gym to colonize, policing the superstructure outside the gym after getting swole. See Nerdy Patriarchs, Real Men, and So-Called Male Witches for a deeper look at this concept. For them and Eugene Sandow, American liberalism and fascism muscles equal brains, but also the right to police others historically materially harmed by state models, e.g. Sean Roden's rape victim discredited by sexist people apologizing for rape tied to patriarchy and profit. White or not, muscular men get a pass all the time, said bias falling them out into a man's world, i.e. one, these men, boys and token tomboys, act like they own since birth, the middle-class myth of ownership, despite bourgeois privatization denying workers anything except the privilege to police each other. These are not new problems, and capital and the profit motive only encourage them to continue, until the state invariably dies, of course. 11/1/2025. Solomon's latest video still doesn't address Mike's racism. In his latest video, my response to Mike Israetel and Layne Norton, Solomon Nelson once again makes zero mention of Mike's race science, ergo racism, despite my critiques of Solomon directly, but also when YouTubers with larger channels than mine, but smaller than his, speak out, e.g. Anabolic Sticks, why Mike Israetel needs to be stopped. Stick directly calling out Mike's race science, while Solomon continues to avoid doing so. Solomon could easily expose Mike's racism, but refuses to, instead foisting it onto smaller channels while focusing on unrelated topics to distract from Mike's racism, regardless of intent. This includes his videos, but also his community posts, the latest of which says fuck all about racism, nor has it been edited to below. My theory about Solomon protecting Mike is that he does so to avoid having to face facts, that the broader scientific community is historically racist, white supremacist, and so is capitalism in the West, e.g. Bad and Banana's own broken clock moment, how the USA inspired the Nazis from Manifest Destiny to Lebensraum, i.e. racism and settler colonial abuse through police brutality both never left, and 2, reflects in the muscular supermen and token Amazons Solomon upholds, with his own drug war and doctor's bias playing devil's advocate, e.g. his use of the term drug pig to describe people like Mike, who are functionally addicts.
Unless you're a drug pig, this sentiment is misleading and defeatist.
Again, this isn't exactly new. Cartesian men think the world is their oyster to pry open, the proof in the pudding of such phrases, and patriarchal murders of strength and intellect, but also dismissal of my arguments out of hand, i.e. while defending Mike Israetel ipso facto like Solomon does. It's thinking beings versus extended beings, as described by Patel and Moore. From my book series Glossary, quote, "The inventors of nature were philosophers as well as conquerors and profiteers. In 1641, Descartes offered what would become the first of two laws of capitalist ecology. The first is seemingly innocent. Descartes distinguished between mind and body, using the Latin re cognitum and re extensa to refer to them. Reality, in this view, is composed of discrete, thinking beings and extended beings. Humans, but not all humans, were thinking things. Nature was full of extended things. The era's ruling classes saw most human beings, women, people of color, indigenous peoples, as extended, not thinking beings. This means that Descartes' philosophical abstractions were practical instruments of domination. They were real abstractions with tremendous material force. And this leads us to Descartes' second law of capitalist ecology. European civilization, or we, in Descartes' word, must become the masters and possessors of nature. Society and nature were not just existentially separate. Nature was something to be controlled and dominated by society. The Cartesian outlook, in other words, shaped modern logics of power as well as thought. The invention of nature and society was gendered at every turn. The binaries of man and woman, nature and society, drank from the same cup. Nature and its boundary with society was gyne-ecological from the outset. Through this radically new mode of organizing life and thought, nature became not a thing, but a strategy that allowed for the ethical and economic cheapening of life. Cartesian dualism was and remains far more than a descriptive statement. It is a normative statement of how to best organize power and hierarchy, humanity and nature, man and woman, colonizer and colonized. Although the credit and blame is shared by many, it makes sense to call this a Cartesian revolution. Here was an intellectual movement that shaped not only ways of thinking, but also ways of conquering, commodifying, and living, that made thinking undoable, the colonial project of mapping and domination. The modern map did not merely describe the world, it was a technology of conquest, unquote. And which I've called out before regarding Solomon himself. Quote, despite its dubious medical usage, obese remains a slur functionally because it comes from a model of measurement, BMI, that is, unto itself, classically racist, ableist, and prone to misuse against different target minorities, i.e. from the Enlightenment and Cartesian revolution onwards, thinking beings versus extended beings, the latter of nature as things to measure and destroy by scientist men of the European colonial order out of the past into the present. R.E. Patel and Moore's A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. That is just another symptom and casualty of that order, under capital as statuesque, embodying men like Solomon, i.e., as of the West, their ontological arguments vying for symmetry as unnatural, man-made, and harmful, while cheapening other forms of life and labor. White moderates champion white supremacy as dogma to raise and flaunt in naked disguise, i.e., the cryptonomy process. I'm not neutral, I'm just posing next to a marble pillar. The West is their J.O. crystal, a double standard to levy against people like myself, playfully noting whatever homosocial qualities men like Solomon enjoy, arbitrate. Their selective enjoyment, whose physical and vocal impunity colonizes such spheres. During reactive abuse, meting out collective punishment through pick-and-choose cases, nerds aren't automatically for the state, but white, cishet, male nerds classically tone police nerd culture, and female non-white, slutty, and/or GNC nerds, i.e. through an apex of privilege haunted by embarrassing realities. People are media. which commonly communicate virtues like strength and health, which medicine is, in patriarchal forms flowing into ethnocentric ones, i.e. across a polity of registers conducive to policing bodies of a neoliberal superheroic stature. Health as a venue to police across and outside itself, meaning in poetically similar territories while using body language is a symbol of status about health and knowledge, but also health as sex symbols useful to status and profit, e.g. video game characters, but also doctors. Unquote. Source: White moderates don't challenge fascism. All of this is to say that Solomon is a complicit cunt, massive bigot, and sucks the big one, hedging his bets while fascism is on the rise. White moderates don't challenge fascism, they aid and abet it. I was right to call Solomon a Nazi back in January.
The last I checked, there were no nerd presidents.
Are there really no nerd presidents? I think you can.
Now here's another white supremacist red flag. Well, I'm going to defend presidents, like cops of the executive branch of the United States and Western countries imitating that model to some degree or another, imitators of the imperial core dominating the rest of the world.
You can see nerds in positions of power everywhere. Think Kevin Rudd, Lee Kuan Yew. In fact, there's a great comment on Daniel's video pointing out that the majority of people who run the world is made up of nerds.
You mean the owner class? Oh yeah, that's a good thing to apologize for. So you're basically, it's capitalist realism and you're apologizing for the bourgeoisie. Yep, you're a white supremacist.
Think Bezos. Gates.
Zuckerberg. They're all fucking oligarchs, dude. God, you're a Nazi. No wonder you're debating Nazis. He's done absolutely nothing to prove me wrong. He's not just two-faced then, but faceless in ways that only Western liberalism can produce. Essentially Ash the science officer from Alien, protecting the xenomorph at the expense of the crew, a symbol for fascism in this case, such things being dualistic, allowing for multiple interpretations. How come the company sent us a goddamn robot? All I can think of is they must have wanted the alien for their weapons division. He's been protecting it right along. I cannot stress enough how typical Solomon's behavior is of white moderates defending fascism, ergo racism. Solomon says he's a law-abiding citizen, that doctors aren't cops, and not all cops are bad, etc. No mention of genocide, e.g. the Palestinians. It's the white moderate handbook, used from Jim Crow onwards, i.e. to maintain peace is a white man's word in a white man's world, which Martin Luther King called the presence of negative justice during the absence of tension, quote unquote. Source: White moderates don't challenge fascism. In regards to Solomon's fatphobia demonizing my friends and my evidence against him, Sinead and all doctors are bad below, previously given by me to Solomon at his request, only for him to subsequently dismiss it outright as dubious, i.e. while ignoring the evidence in said list, marking Dr. Mike as a race scientist, then refusing to respond to my essay showing him what he is on the aegis, a coward, a bigot, and a fool, pretending like racism in STEM doesn't exist. Furthermore, Solomon quoting "the spice must flow" is awfully rich, given both his defense of billionaires and incessant refusal to critique Mike's racism only aids in profit genocide. Capital is dying, Solomon, and your betrayals to workers now will only sow greater harm later as capital decays into fascism again. They'll come for us minorities, and then they'll come for you, white straight liberals. Even if you swear fealty when that happens, fascism is a death cult that eats itself, crew expendable, but also annoying nerds who don't believe in zombies, the cannibalistic effect of capital and decay on middle-class brains, as Barbara's brother tragically found out at Night of the Living Dead below. Capital eats nerds too, dipshit. In regards to fascism being a death cult, quote, everyone is educated to become a hero. In our fascist ideology, heroism is the norm. This cult of heroism is strictly linked with the cult of death, unquote. Source: Umberto Eco's list of the 14 common features of fascism regarding middle-class brains and Capital's effects on them, refer to Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse Part 1 to see this idea explored at length. For a quick and dirty example, refer to Ross Lockhart's Attack of the Bourgeois Brain Eaters. Indeed, your thumbnail is awfully telling of your actions, Solomon, but also your brain-dead plan and doomed outcome, your fort and subsequent siege mentality resembling the Maginot Line. Said line being a gravesite for so many French soldiers who were massacred in their concrete bunkers, e.g. those at La Ferté burned ignominiously alive in 1940 when the Germans caused fires inside the compound, or the Germans' own hubris exposing them at Normandy and elsewhere, i.e. after their Atlantic Wall failed to materialize. In either case, theirs or yours, the Emperor has no clothes, and my patience with you is well and truly at its end. As an anti-fascist and Gothicist medievalist, I study castles in and out of history, but also those who occupy them, the ignominious dead who, from Troy to Rome to Camelot to the present space and time, undermine themselves through fatal hubris, specifically a failure to learn from the past, on stage and off. Your position is not secure, my friend, your inability to address this fact only reinforcing your doom when the time comes. The enemy is already here. Not my friends and I, are communists, but the very institutions and bad actors you're defending to the point of no return. From the Undead module, quote, "With Caesar dead, Rome had moved from one crisis to the next," writes Hokeley in A History of Rome in Paintings. This includes Marx's 18th Brumaire, alluding to that tradition with all dead generations weighing on our brains, i.e. that cyclical, historical material matter of tragedy and farce we must rescue from itself, through Little Gothic BDSM, as camping such specters and supplanting them with far gayer forms than the usual heteronormative Cartesian idiots bother to try, always scapegoating Medusa instead of Caesar. Unquote. Caesar, the American elite, has already crossed the Rubicon, home slice, and your follow-the-leader strategy is a death march. Pull your head out of your ass and take a stand against racism like you seemingly once did. We're all going to die, Solomon. Don't you want to be remembered for something other than a willfully stupid, lame duck coward going down with the ship? What Shakespeare once called the Roman fool in Macbeth. Real quick here at the end, I didn't have a chance to show these videos themselves, but here is Bro Science endorsing Dr. Mike in their video, and here is Dr. Mike endorsing Bro Science. So neither one of these guys is good either. They both suck. He's a race science, he's a sexist bigot, and Solomon Nelson has been historically unable to say anything about Dr. Mike Israetel's race science, which is a form of fascist apologia. It makes not only Mike racist, but it makes Solomon Nelson racist as well. White moderates and open reactionaries are complicit. This is all kayfabe. So, with all of that being said, thank you for watching this video and sitting through my update. If you'd like to support the work I do, you can do so either on Ko-fi or Patreon. You can also like, share, and subscribe this YouTube channel. You can leave a comment. Anything helps. And the money goes towards combating racism. So if you believe in actually combating racism, supporting me is one way to do that. In any event, thank you for watching my video. And until next time, stay safe out there and fuck fascists.